The Hand of the Day.
Hey guys, it's Alec, Torelli, and welcome back to an episode of the Hand of the Day. I'm bringing you this one from the 43rd floor of the Hilton in San Francisco. Beautiful view. Thought it would be cool to make a video here. So today I'm reviewing part of a series where I'm reviewing all the big hands on day 7 of the World Series of Poker main event. This hand kicks off with blinds of 200, 400k, and Veo opens to 900k on the button. Very deep, about 40 million, 100 big blind stack, opens to 900k on the button. Josephy calls in the small blind with ace-5 of clubs, and Cynn calls in the big blind with jack-10 offsuit. 3 ways to the flop, pot of 3 million. So I like Veo's open here, and I think it's fine. I really like it, especially because, of course, being in position on the button with ace high is a reasonable open, but I also like it because of the stack size of the big blind. It's tough for Cynn to compete in this pot with only 11 million or so pre-flop, because he's really threatened by playing this pot against a stack size with 40 million. So I really like opening here, puts the big blind to on the defense right away. And I also like how Josephy played it. I like flatting here out of position with ace-5 suited. Your hand plays decent post-flop. And I wouldn't want to be in a spot where I'm 3-betting out of position against another 100 big blind stack so deep in the tournament, when you could just, most of the time play in position against Veo, with Josephy being to his left. You could wait for better spots to play pots in position, and you don't really want to inflate the pot out of position. You just put yourself to a tough decision when you don't really need to do that at this point in the tournament. So I like flatting from his point of view. I also like flatting from Cynn in the big blind. You close the action, and you're calling 500k more. The pot's 2.5 million. So far pre-flop, totally standard. Flop comes 8-7 deuce with 2 clubs. Josephy leads out half pot for 1.5 million. Cynn calls in the big blind, and Veo folds on the button. So let's talk about Josephy leading here. I think leading is fine. You should mix up some leads on a board like this, and I think Josephy could rep something like 9s, 10s, or jacks as well. He won't always 3-bet preflop with those hands, especially because he wants to trap the big blind, who might shove all in, and then he could call if Veo folds or whatever. So I think he could have some overpairs here, and I think he could be leading with some 8x types hands as well. Mix in some bluffs and some flush draws and whatever. So I don't mind leading here. I guess you could check raise with something like ace-5 of clubs, but you don't really want to be playing a huge pot out of position against Veo. So I like leading, taking control of the pot, and sort of forcing Veo out of the hand and keep the big blind in the hand with a worse draw, or like 9-10 or something like that. So I don't mind leading here. I would mix in some check calls as well, maybe even some check raises, but more seldom with a check raise. So I don't mind Josephy leading. I think as long as you're mixing it up, that's fine. Cynn calls in the big blind, which I think is a little loose. He still has Veo behind him, who can, maybe, he can't really bluff raise because, Cynn's in the pot and he might have something. But he could raise with like an E8 and be getting it in against Cynn and folding if Josephy jams. But he could be competing in this pot or floating as well. So Cynn has, jack 10. It's just like not good enough to call, I think. It's a little too loose, and it's such a big portion of your relative stack size that you have left. If he had like 30 million, I would be totally fine with flatting here, but I think with 10 million, like his stack size is just a little bit too loose. I think I would have folded, but I don't mind the call. I would try and wait for a little bit better of a spot. Also, you don't really know what to do on the turn. Like Josephy could be bluffing, but if he's bluffing, he might bluff again on the turn because he can afford to, because he has 40 million, whereas you can't really afford to compete in the pot because you only have 10 million. And if he bluffs on the turn, you still have to fold. So like, I don't know if Josephy's gonna shut down a lot, and you just put yourself in a really tough spot. Maybe he knows something about Josephy that I don't. Maybe he kind of knows how he plays better than me, and he could find a better reason for calling. But without any like serious reads or information, which I didn't get from this video, I would probably just fold my hand right here. Turn comes a ace of diamonds. So bringing 2 diamonds and 2 clubs. Josephy bets out 2.2 million. Cynn raises to 5 million. Josephy shoves, and Cynn folds. let's talk about leading first of all. If I'm Josephy, if I'm Josephy in this spot and my opponent has 10 million, the pot's 6 million, I'm not going to be betting here because I want to give my opponent a chance to bet in this pot. So if I check, I feel like a lot of times my opponent's going to bet. He's going to try and rep an ace if he has a bluff, and if he has a hand like 7x or 8x, it's unlikely I get 2 streets of value with ace 5. So because I don't only think I'm going to get 1 street of value from a worse hand, I don't think my opponent's going to call a big bet on the turn and then an all-in on the river with like second or third pair. So I think I have to check 1 street. But I would probably check the turn because I expect that if I bet with ace 5, my opponent's going to fold his bluffs. I think it's unlikely that most players are going to take the line that Cynn took and try and raise with a bluff to rep like 2 pair or something and try and win the pot. Most of the time I think players that have jack 10 or 9-10 or a float or whatever it is are just going to fold their hand on the turn. They might also fold a 7 on the turn. And maybe even they fold an 8 if they're a little bit tighter. So if I'm betting the turn, I expect that most of the time my opponent's going to fold. Whereas, unless he has me beat. Maybe he doesn't fold like all his draws, but my point is that you win more money by checking than you do by betting. Because if you check, now your opponent might turn a hand into a bluff, like maybe with 7-6, he decides to bluff with it. Maybe he like makes a blocking bet with an 8 to try and like get a cheap showdown. Maybe he now bluffs with a jack 10. I think he's much more likely to put money in the pot with a hand like jack 10 when you check than he is by betting. Also, when you check from Josephy's point of view, you don't really have any cards that hurt you. You block all the clubs, so if your opponent has a lower flush draw, you don't really want him folding the turn, right? You want him to bet, and then maybe you check raise all in, depending on how big he bets, and maybe he's committed to the pot. Now maybe he calls it off or whatever, or maybe you just check call and let him bluff the river, and then have some bluff catchers in your range if you're Josephy. The last reason I like checking if I'm Josephy is that most of my hands on the turn are going to check. Like if I have 2 9s or 8x or 2 10s, I'm going to be checking those hands on the turn. And so if I'm only checking the turn if I'm always betting the turn with ace-x, then every time I check the turn, I have weak sort of bluff catchers. And then my opponent can, exploit me or outplay me or bluff or value bet me, and I really don't know what to do. So I'd like to check with some strong hands here too, to sort of balance my range the times I have nothing, right? So I would like to see a check here from Josephy. Now let's talk about Cynn's raise here. He makes it 5 million. I understand what he's trying to do. I think that he probably expects, maybe he has some of my similar logic where he expects that Josephy would have checked the turn if he had an ace, and he feels like most of the time that Josephy has like a draw here when he bets twice. The thing is that Cynn blocks some of the draws that Josephy can have. He has a 10 in his hand, which blocks 10-9, it blocks jack 10, it blocks jack, and he has a jack, which blocks jack 9, and he also has a jack of clubs, which blocks some of the flush draws that Josephy could be leading with. So I don't like this hand a ton to pick to bluff raise because, a lot of the hands you're hoping your opponent has, you block those hands. So the other thing is you're raising 5 million, which is half your stack, and Josephy can afford to maybe call your raise because the raise is so small. Maybe he calls with some of his draws to try and hit on the river. Maybe he makes a little bit loose of a call because he can afford to bust you. Or maybe he just doesn't fold and jams it in anyway because, he has a big draw, there's 1 card to go, and maybe he just puts it in with something like, 9-10 of diamonds if he were to have it. I mean, you have the 10 of diamonds, so he can't, but he has like a straight draw and a flush draw or whatever it is, and he just doesn't fold. Maybe he just calls with an 8 on the turn, and then, you don't know what to do as well, right? So I don't really love bluff raising here just because, you block some of the hands that you want your opponent to have, and you're not really representing that many hands. I think if Cynn had something like a set or 2 pair, he probably would have raised the flop. So, on the turn, you're repping like ace-8, like aces up, basically. Ace-2 probably folds the flop, so you really have like ace-8, ace-7. And maybe you have some sets in 2 pairs, but I think a lot of those times you're going to just flat call the turn with sets in 2 pairs, so I don't know. It's just like a little thin, a little aggressive. You're risking half your stack, which is completely crushing to you if you lose this hand, right? If your opponent doesn't fold, you have 12 big blinds left or something like that. So I probably would just fold, keep my 25 big blind stack, because preserving your stack is so much more important than risking half your stack to try and win this pot. So I think I would fold even though it's tempting to raise. I understand why he raised because I probably feels like Josephy doesn't have that many strong mate hands, and maybe Josephy's gonna bet fold an 8 on the turn or bet fold some draws. So I understand raising, but at the same time, it's so risky the times that it doesn't work, and it's just crippling. So I'd probably just fold here and be a little bit more conservative. Josephy, I think, after the raise has a very easy, he can't fold, right? So Josephy could either call or jam. If I'm Josephy, I would probably just call as well. I guess you could jam and like, you know, just to not be outplayed, but I would probably just call here because I would want, if my opponent's bluffing, I would want him to continue bluffing on the river, and I also don't expect my opponent to ever put all the money in with a worse hand. Like, maybe he's gonna, I guess the case for raising if you're Josephy is when your opponent has a draw, he's gonna call it off, and the times that you just flat call, you give your opponent a free card and he can like play perfectly on the river and just check behind. That being said, if your opponent is bluffing, he's gonna fold, and if your opponent has you beat, he's gonna call if you go all in. So you kind of have to outweigh the times like your opponent's bluffing and then weigh that against the times that your opponent is gonna call all in with a draw. So I think my opponent's like more likely to raise a draw. I would go all in because he's getting a good price to call. He's gonna call my all in if he has a draw. I think my opponent has a hand that he's capable of folding if I shove, like 7x, but he might bluff shove the river or something like that. Then maybe I just call and, you know, try and get him to bluff the river. Probably going all in is the best play because the pot is so big. You don't want to get outplayed. You don't want to give your opponent a chance to play perfectly or outplay you on the river. And if he does have a hand like 7-6 and he's always going to check the river if I call, I would rather shove and not let him like realize his equity for free, even though it's really small. So I'm fine with Josephy shoving. I think that's like a smaller decision in the hand. I mean, I understand it's an all-in decision, but it's like the pot's already so big and Josephy's never going to fold that, you know, shoving or calling is a small sort of difference. So I would probably just shove it all in if I'm Josephy and just, you know, hope to win the pot. Anyway, that's it for this hand of the day. I hope you took something from it. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up, share it with someone you think would benefit, and I will be putting out more Day 7 hand of the days leading up to the World Series and the couple days after, and reviewing all the big hands from Day 7 right here on this channel. So stay subscribed, and I will see you guys next time for the hand of the day. Take it easy. Cheers.